The flashbulbs were a symphony of arrogance, and he was its conductor. Alexander Caldwell, titan of industry, stood at the entrance of New York's most anticipated new restaurant, L'Étoile d'Or. On his arm was Tiffany Monroe, a woman whose beauty was as loud as the reporters' questions. He was a king parading his newest, most gleaming prize. He smirked, believing his pregnant wife, Gabriella, was exactly where she belonged, at home, docile and irrelevant. But the rhythm of the clicking cameras suddenly faltered. A hush fell over the clamoring crowd as a black Rolls-Royce ghost glided to the curb. The door opened, and what happened next wasn't just an interruption. It was a detonation. The explosion that would shatter Alexander's world began with the emergence of his wife's elegant shoe on the red carpet. The air in the new L'Étoile d'Or was thick with the scent of money and truffle oil. It was a self-congratulatory atmosphere, a bubble of the 1% celebrating their own existence under the guise of launching a restaurant. At the center of this universe, holding court by the cascading champagne fountain, was Alexander Caldwell. He was a man built from generational wealth and ruthless acquisitions, his posture radiating an unshakable belief in his own superiority. His suit was a custom Tom Ford so perfectly tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second, more expensive skin. On his arm, clinging with a proprietary grip, was Tiffany Monroe. She was 24, an Instagram model, with eyes the color of a shallow sea and ambition that ran deeper than any ocean. Her dress was a sliver of red silk that left little to the imagination and everything to the gossip columns. She giggled a sound like tiny bells as Alexander whispered something into her ear, his hand possessively on the small of her back. They were a spectacle, and they knew it. "Isn't this just divine?" Lex Tiffany purred, tilting her head back, so the light from the crystal chandeliers caught the diamond necklace he'd gifted her just that morning. It was a new piece, a glaringly obvious replacement for the one he'd once given his wife. "Only the best for you, my dear Alexander," murmured, his eyes sweeping the room. He saw them all, the rival hedge fund managers, the aging socialites, the fawning journalists from Vanity Fair and Forbes. They were all watching. Good. Let them watch. Let them see that Alexander Caldwell took what he wanted, when he wanted. His phone had been buzzing in his pocket for the last hour, ignored. He knew the calls were from his 6 months pregnant wife, Gabriella. He pictured her in their cavernous Fifth Avenue penthouse, probably curled on the silk chaise lounge, reading a book on 17th century art history, and wondering if he'd be home for dinner. The image was both comforting and profoundly boring. Gabriella was foundation. Solid, reliable, and utterly unexciting. She was the woman his father had approved of, the daughter of his own mentor, a perfect corporate wife who understood seating charts and charity boards. But she had no fire, no edge. Not like Tiffany. Tiffany was a firework, dazzling and dangerous, and most importantly, new. Mr. Caldwell, a reporter from the New York Post, pushed forward a microphone, extended like a weapon. A bold statement tonight, arriving with Ms. Monroe. "Any comment on the rumors about your marriage?" Alexander gave a low, rumbling chuckle. It was a sound he'd practiced, designed to convey power and amusement in equal measure. "I'm here to support my friend Chef Dubois on his magnificent opening, and I'm fortunate to be accompanied by the lovely Ms. Monroe. That's all." He squeezed Tiffany's hand, a silent signal that was as loud as a pronouncement. The message was clear. The old guard was out. The new was in. He was reveling in the shockwaves his appearance was causing, the delicious scandal of it all, when a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere. It wasn't a loud noise, but the opposite, a sudden spreading silence. The chatter near the entrance died down first, the hush rippling through the room like a contagion. Heads turned, eyes widened. The symphony of flashbulbs outside which had been focused on him suddenly pivoted, firing in a frantic, unified volley toward the street. Alexander felt a prickle of annoyance. Who could possibly be stealing his spotlight? Another tech billionaire, a visiting royal. He turned, a condescending smile fixed on his face, ready to dismiss whoever it was. The smile froze, then melted away, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief. Framed in the grand doorway, bathed in the merciless glare of the cameras, was his wife, Gabriella. But it was not the Gabriella he had left at home. This was not the quiet, bookish woman in cashmere loungewear. This woman was a vision of lethal elegance. She wore a deep emerald gown, custom-made by a designer he didn't recognize, that draped exquisitely over her pregnant form, celebrating it rather than hiding it. Her normally simple brown hair was swept up in a sophisticated chignon, revealing the sparkle of what he recognized with a jolt as her late mother's emerald and diamond earrings pieces she never wore. Her face, often soft and gentle, was set with a serene, almost chilling composure. She looked powerful. She looked breathtaking. And she was not alone. Holding her arm, his presence as solid and reassuring as granite, was Liam Donovan. The blood drained from Alexander's face. Liam Donovan, the self-made CEO of Tech, the disruptive tech giant that was actively trying to gut the traditional manufacturing sector, where Caldwell Industries reigned supreme. Donovan was everything Alexander was not new money. Innovative, universally admired for his ethical business practices, and infuriatingly charismatic. He was Alexander's chief rival, a man he loathed with a passion he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. And he was escorting Alexander's pregnant wife onto the red carpet. They moved through the parted crowd as if they were royalty, and the rest were mere peasants. Liam's hand rested lightly on Gabriella's back, a gesture of quiet support. His eyes, a piercing blue, scanned the room before locking onto Alexander's. There was no triumph in his gaze, no smugness. There was something far worse, pity. Gabriella's eyes found his last. There was no pain in them, no tears, no betrayal. There was only a calm, cool assessment, the way a geologist might look at a rock she was about to shatter. The silence in the restaurant was now absolute. The air crackled with a tension so thick you could taste it. Tiffany, sensing a seismic shift in the power dynamic, tightened her grip on Alexander's arm. "Lex, who is that? That's your wife. What is she doing here with him?" Alexander couldn't answer. His mind was a frantic mess of denial and rage. This wasn't possible. Gabriella didn't do scenes. She was decorous, predictable. This was a declaration of war. As they reached the champagne fountain, the epicenter of the room, Gabriella finally spoke. Her voice, clear and steady, cut through the silence. "Alexander." She said the name sounding foreign on her lips. She gave a small, polite nod. Then she turned her gaze to the woman clinging to his arm. "Tiffany, I've seen your pictures. The Cartier bracelet is lovely. It was a difficult choice between that and the Panthère necklace, but I'm glad you liked my runner-up suggestion." Tiffany's face went pale. The insinuation was as sharp as a shard of glass that Gabriella was not a victim, but an observer, perhaps even an architect of this drama. Alexander found his voice, a low growl of fury. "Gabriella, what is the meaning of this? You should be at home." "Should I?" she replied, one perfect eyebrow arched. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you. But then we all have our disappointments." She turned her attention to the circle of onlookers, her voice rising just enough to be heard by everyone. "Please, everyone, don't let us interrupt your evening. My husband was just taking out the trash." Her eyes flicked to Tiffany for a fraction of a second before returning to Alexander's thunderous face. The insult was so direct, so public it was like a physical blow. A collective gasp went through the room. Tiffany looked as if she'd been slapped. Before Alexander could explode, Liam Donovan stepped forward, slightly positioning himself between Alexander and Gabriella. "I think we've done what we came here to do," he said, his voice a low baritone of command. He looked at Alexander. "Caldwell, a word of advice. You should call your broker. First thing in the morning." With that, he gently took Gabriella's arm. "Shall we, Gabe?" She gave a final dismissive glance at her husband and his mistress. "Yes, let's." As they turned and walked away, the room erupted into a cacophony of frantic whispers. Alexander was left standing in the wreckage, Tiffany, a trembling accessory on his arm. The flashbulbs that had once felt like a crown of glory now felt like an interrogation lamp. He had walked in as a king intending to humiliate his wife. But in the space of 3 minutes, she had arrived, detonated a bomb in the middle of his life, and walked away, leaving him as the fool. He didn't understand what had happened. He only knew that the ground beneath his feet had just given way, and he was in a free fall. The look in Gabriella's eyes wasn't that of a woman scorned. It was the look of a CEO about to execute a hostile takeover. The night of the L'Étoile d'Or opening was not the beginning of Gabriella's war. It was the grand public unveiling of a campaign that had been meticulously planned for months in the quiet solitude of her supposed gilded cage. The unraveling had started 6 months prior with a single sterile email notification from American Express. A charge from a boutique jeweler in the West Village for $72,400. It wasn't a store Gabriella frequented. Alexander's gifts to her were always from established old-world houses like Harry Winston or Graf Investments, he called them, as romantic as a stock portfolio. This was different. This felt personal, secretive. With a growing sense of dread, Gabriella did something she had never done before. She hired a private investigator. A discreet firm recommended by the family lawyer, specializing in the delicate affairs of the ultra-wealthy. The preliminary report came back within a week, and it was clinical in its cruelty. Photographs, dates, hotel suites at the Carlyle, weekend trips to St. Bart's on the company jet logged as off-site corporate strategy sessions. The woman was Tiffany Monroe, an aspiring model whose social media was a curated shrine to a lifestyle she couldn't possibly afford on her own. The discovery of the affair was a profound, soul-crushing blow. But it was the discovery of her pregnancy, just 2 weeks later, that transformed her grief into something colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous resolve. She had cried for 3 days, locked in the master suite of their penthouse, the vast emptiness of the space mocking the hollowness she felt inside. She mourned the man she thought she had married, the future she believed they were building for their child. On the 4th day, the tears stopped. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, pale, exhausted, but with a flicker of something new in her eyes. Her father, a titan of industry himself, who had mentored a young Alexander, had always told her, "Never make a decision based on emotion, Jenny. Emotion is a storm. Wait for it to pass, then survey the landscape and chart your course." The storm had passed. Now it was time to chart her course. She knew that a messy public divorce was exactly what Alexander would expect. He would paint her as a hysterical, hormonal pregnant woman. His army of lawyers at Scotland Arps would bury her in paperwork, bleed her dry, and offer her a generous settlement to go away quietly. He would keep the company the power, the reputation. She would be a footnote in his biography, the discarded first wife. That was not a future she would accept. Not for herself, and certainly not for her child. She needed an ally. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet. She needed someone who understood the world Alexander inhabited, someone who could see the chessboard as clearly as he did. Her mind immediately went to one person, Liam Donovan. She and Liam had been close at Stanford. They were intellectual equals, thriving in the competitive environment of the graduate business program. While others were drawn to Alexander's flashy inherited confidence, Liam had been quiet, intense, and brilliant. They had spent countless late nights in the library, debating economic theory and sketching out business plans on napkins. There had been a spark between them, an unspoken connection, but her father's approval of Alexander and the sheer momentum of Alexander's world had pulled her into a different orbit. They had lost touch after her marriage, exchanging polite Christmas cards and little else. Finding his private number took her less than an hour. She called him from a burner phone, her heart pounding. "Donovan," he answered, his voice unchanged, still deep and calm. "Liam, it's Gabriella. Gabriella Caldwell." There was a pause. "Gabe. Wow. It's been a long time. Is everything all right?" He sounded genuinely concerned, not just polite. "No," she said, her voice cracking for the first time in days. "No, it's not. I need your help. Not as a friend, but as a strategist. I need to understand my husband's business from the outside." They met the next day in a discreet coffee shop in Brooklyn, a world away from the prying eyes of Manhattan's elite. She laid it all out, the affair, the pregnancy, Alexander's arrogance. But she didn't dwell on the emotional betrayal. Instead, she pivoted to business. "He's become reckless, Liam. He's leveraging stable assets to fund high-risk ventures I know nothing about. He's using the company jet for personal trips. His expense reports must be a work of fiction. He thinks he's untouchable, that Caldwell Industries is his personal piggy bank. He's forgotten something crucial." "What's that?" Liam asked, leaning forward, his coffee. "Forgotten." "That I own 12% of it," Gabriella said, a cold fire in her eyes. "My father left me his founding shares. It's a non-voting block, as long as Alexander holds the CEO position and the company maintains a certain performance threshold. But the bylaws my father wrote are ironclad. There are clauses, a moral turpitude clause for one, and provisions for gross mismanagement. Alexander has always dismissed my stake as a formality, a sentimental inheritance. He has no idea I've read every word of those bylaws." Liam's eyes widened slightly. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was a potential corporate coup. For the next 5 months, they worked in secret. Liam provided the resources of Auratech's formidable forensic accounting team. They operated under a ghost project codename, Project Nightingale. Gabriella, working from her home office, became an archaeologist of her husband's empire, digging through years of financial reports, shareholder letters, and market analyses she had previously ignored. What they found was damning. Alexander had been propping up failing acquisitions with profits from the company's legacy divisions. He'd embarked on vanity projects that had no clear path to profitability. He'd signed off on executive bonuses that were wildly out of step with performance. He was a king presiding over a slowly decaying kingdom, all while projecting an image of unassailable success. The affair with Tiffany wasn't just a personal failing, it was a symptom of a deeper arrogance and recklessness that had infected his professional life. The plan they formulated was audacious and two-pronged. First, they would expose Alexander publicly, not just as an adulterer, but as an unstable and erratic leader, creating a crisis of confidence. Second, they would use that crisis to trigger the clauses in the bylaws backed by Liam's proposal to the board to acquire the mismanaged divisions, presenting themselves as the stable, sensible alternative. The late-while door opening was the perfect stage. Gabriella knew Alexander would be there with Tiffany. A source inside his PR team, a young woman Alexander had passed over for a promotion, in favor of a less qualified male colleague, had confirmed it. Preparing for that night was like preparing for battle. The dress was chosen to be a statement of power, the emeralds a symbol of her family's legacy, the very legacy Alexander was squandering. She practiced her lines in the mirror, stripping them of all emotion, until they were as sharp and clean as a surgeon's scalpel. In the back of the Rolls-Royce moments before they arrived, she had felt a wave of nausea and fear. Her baby kicked a small, insistent flutter. She placed a hand on her stomach. "It's okay," she whispered as much to herself as to the child within. "I'm doing this for you, so you will never have to depend on a man like your father." Liam had looked at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You don't have to do this, Gabe. We can find another way." "He built his throne by using my father's reputation and my inheritance," she said, her voice hardening. "He's parading that woman around while I carry his child. He thinks I'm a decorative object. Tonight he learns that I am the foundation he stands on, and I am about to crumble it to dust. It has to be this way. It has to be public." As she stepped out of the car and walked into the blinding flash of the cameras, she felt no fear. She was not Gabriella Caldwell, the wronged wife. She was Gabriella Langdon, daughter of a titan, a major shareholder, and the architect of her husband's downfall. The show was just beginning. The aftermath of the L'Etoile d'Or incident was not a slow burn. It was a wildfire. By 7 a.m. the next morning, the story was the lead item on every financial news network and the banner headline on every gossip site. Photos of a stunned Alexander and a horrified Tiffany were juxtaposed with images of a regal Gabriella and a composed Liam Donovan. The headlines were brutal: Caldwell's collapse, Billionaire's brawl at L'Etoile, the CEO and the wife, an empire on the brink. In his penthouse, which now felt less like a castle and more like a besieged fortress, Alexander was in a state of apoplectic rage. He'd thrown a $30,000 Lalique vase against a wall, shattering it into 1,000 pieces, a fitting metaphor for his life. "Find her." He roared into the phone at his head of security. "I don't care where she is. A hotel, a friend's place. Find her now." But Gabriella had vanished. Her clothes were gone from the closet, her personal effects absent from the bathroom. She had moved with the swift, silent efficiency of a special forces operative. Her phone went straight to a number that was no longer in service. Tiffany, who had spent the night alternating between fits of tears and panicked demands, was not helping. "What are we going to do?" "Lex, my agent, just called. A brand dropped me. They said they don't want to be associated with this messy drama." "You have to fix this. Be quiet!" He snapped, pacing his office like a caged lion. "I'm trying to think." But he wasn't thinking clearly. His fury was a fog clouding his judgment. He saw this purely as a personal betrayal, a wife's hysterical revenge. He completely underestimated the professional nature of the attack. His first calls were to his PR team. "Spin it," he commanded. "Say my wife is having a difficult pregnancy. She's emotionally unstable. That Donovan is a predator taking advantage of her fragile state to attack me. Frame me as the victim, the concerned husband." His seasoned PR chief, a woman named Beverly, hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect, the visuals don't support that narrative." She didn't look unstable. She looked powerful. And calling a pregnant woman hysterical is a minefield we should not enter. "Just do it!" He bellowed and slammed the phone down. His next call was to his lawyers, demanding they file for divorce immediately and slap Gabriella with a restraining order for public harassment. Again he was met with caution. Alexander, his lead counsel, a man who had worked for the Caldwell family for 40 years, said gravely, "We need to be careful. Mrs. Caldwell. Gabriella is a Langdon. Her father wrote the corporate charter, and she is still a 12% shareholder. Antagonizing her before we understand her endgame is unwise. She's my wife. Her endgame is to embarrass me. But as the morning wore on, the true nature of the attack became horrifyingly clear. At 9:31 a.m., just 1 minute after the opening bell on the New York Stock Exchange, the stock for Caldwell Industries ticker, CWI, plummeted by 9%. The market hated instability, and the pictures splashed across the internet were the very definition of it. Billions in market capitalization had been wiped out in minutes. Then came the second blow. At 10:00 a.m., an official press release was issued by the law firm representing Gabriella Langdon. It was a masterstroke of corporate warfare disguised as a concerned shareholder's plea. The release stated that in light of recent events that call into question the judgment and stability of CEO Alexander Caldwell, and in her capacity as a significant shareholder acting to protect the value of the company her father helped build, Miss Langdon was formally petitioning the board of directors to convene an emergency meeting. It cited specific bylaws related to conduct detrimental to the company's reputation and hinted at a forthcoming presentation regarding fiscal irregularities and mismanagement. Alexander stared at the press release on his computer screen, his blood running cold. Fiscal irregularities, mismanagement. This wasn't about the affair. This was about everything. She had been digging. He felt a wave of disbelief, followed by a surge of patronizing anger. Gabriella, the art history major. What could she possibly know about corporate finance? It had to be Donovan. He was feeding her this, using her as a puppet to launch his attack. The board members, a coterie of old money industrialists and cronies who had benefited from Alexander's leadership, began calling. Their tone was no longer friendly. It was panicked. Alexander, what the hell is going on? Demanded Robert Pike, a board member whose pension fund had a massive position in CWI. My phone is ringing off the hook. Are these allegations about mismanagement credible? Of course not, Alexander blustered, trying to project confidence. It's a fabrication, a pathetic attempt at revenge from a scorned woman being manipulated by our biggest competitor. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The board, whose primary loyalty was to the stock price, was spooked. They agreed to Gabriella's request for an emergency meeting. It was set for Friday in 3 days' time. Meanwhile, Tiffany was becoming an increasing liability. She was giving tearful off-the-record quotes to tabloid reporters, trying to paint herself as a victim caught in a billionaire's war. I love Lex, she was quoted as saying in a leaked text message. I just never knew his wife was so vindictive. Each quote was another drop of poison, further eroding the narrative of the unstable wife Alexander's team was trying to push. Gabriella remained silent, a phantom of immense power, letting her press release and the crashing stock price do the talking. Desperate, Alexander tried a different tactic. He began transferring money out of joint accounts, attempting to cut off Gabriella's access to funds. Within an hour, his private banker from Goldman Sachs called him. Mr. Caldwell, I'm afraid I can't authorize that transfer. We've received a court order, a temporary injunction, freezing all marital assets pending a review. It was filed this morning by Mrs. Caldwell's legal team. He was financially checkmated. She had anticipated his every move. For the first time, a genuine sense of fear began to creep into Alexander's heart. He had always seen Gabriella as a beautiful passive part of his life's portfolio. He'd acquired her just as he'd acquired companies. He never once stopped to consider the mind behind her quiet smiles or the strength hidden in her gentle demeanor. He had poked a sleeping dragon, and now his entire kingdom was on fire. He was scheduled to defend his crown in 3 days, and he was walking into a battle for which he was utterly unprepared. The boardroom of Caldwell Industries, located on the 80th floor of a skyscraper in the heart of Manhattan, was designed to intimidate. A single colossal mahogany table, polished to a mirror sheen, sat under a stark, modernist chandelier. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city, a constant reminder of the power wielded within those 4 walls. On any other day, Alexander Caldwell would have walked into this room as its undisputed king. Today, he walked in like a defendant entering a courtroom. The 8 board members were already seated, their faces grim. They were men in their 60s and 70s lifers in the world of corporate power. Their expressions practiced masks of neutrality that barely concealed their panic over the company's stock, which had continued its downward slide for 3 straight days. Alexander took his seat at the head of the table, forcing an air of confident nonchalance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice a little too loud in the tense silence. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I know there have been concerns. Let me assure you this is a private marital dispute that has been grotesquely sensationalized by an opportunistic rival. It has no bearing on the financial health or strategic direction of this company." As if on cue, the double doors to the boardroom opened. Gabriella entered. She was not the avenging angel from the restaurant. Today she was dressed for war. She wore an impeccably tailored grey suit, her hair pulled back severely. She looked less like a scorned wife and more like a prosecutor from the SEC. She carried a leather-bound portfolio and was flanked by 2 lawyers from a top corporate litigation firm, not a divorce firm. She took a seat opposite Alexander, placing her portfolio on the table with a quiet, definitive thud. "Good morning, gentlemen." "Mr. Caldwell." Her voice was devoid of emotion. "Gabriella, this is a corporate boardroom, not a stage for your personal drama." Alexander snarpened. "This is wholly inappropriate." Robert Pike, the most senior board member, cleared his throat. "Alexander, Miss Langdon, a Mrs. Caldwell, is here at the board's invitation. As a major shareholder, she has the right to be heard." "Please proceed, Ms. Langdon." Gabriella nodded, her eyes never leaving Alexander's. "I have no interest in discussing my personal life. As my father's daughter and a protector of my investment in this company, I am here to discuss its performance and leadership." For the next 20 minutes, she delivered a calm, methodical, and utterly devastating critique of Alexander's tenure as CEO. She didn't raise her voice. She used no emotional language. She simply presented facts, with the aid of a crisp PowerPoint presentation projected onto a screen behind her. She walked the board through a litany of Alexander's failures. "Slide 4, she said, her voice echoing in the silent room, shows the performance of the 3 tech startups acquired by Mr. Caldwell over the last 2 years, for a total of $1.4 billion. They have collectively lost $600 million in value, while the S&P 500 has gained 16%. These were vanity acquisitions designed to make Mr. Caldwell appear to be a tech visionary. She clicked to the next slide. Slide 5 details the rising corporate expenses, specifically the 38% increase in travel and entertainment costs, which correlate directly with the leasing of a new Gulfstream G700 jet and a suspiciously high number of client meetings in locations like Aspen and St. Bart's, none of which have resulted in any new business. Alexander's face was turning a dangerous shade of purple. "This is an outrageous misrepresentation. Those were legitimate business expenses." Gabriella didn't even look at him. She addressed the board. "I invite the audit committee to request the full unredacted expense reports and cross-reference the dates with Ms. Tiffany Monroe's Instagram feed. The correlation is illuminating." A few of the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She had them. She was combining the public scandal with cold, hard numbers, creating a narrative of recklessness that was impossible to ignore. She continued dissecting his failed international expansion, the declining margins in their core manufacturing divisions, and the talent drain as key executives left the company. She presented a picture not of a titan, but of a profligate, negligent emperor with no clothes. The events of this past Tuesday night were not an isolated incident. She concluded, her gaze finally locking on her husband with chilling intensity. They were the symptom of a disease at the heart of this company's leadership, a profound lack of judgment, a prioritization of personal ego over shareholder value, and a reckless disregard for consequences. The market has reacted accordingly. We have lost over $4 billion in valuation in 72 hours because the world no longer has confidence in our CEO. A heavy silence descended upon the room. Alexander was speechless, blindsided by the depth and precision of her attack. He had been preparing to defend himself against a jealous wife. He had not been prepared to defend his entire career against a forensic audit. Before he could formulate a response, Gabriella's lawyer spoke up. "Gabettleman, in light of this presentation, Ms. Langdon tables a motion of no confidence in Mr. Caldwell. Furthermore, we have a secondary matter to present." He nodded to his associate, who patched in a video call to the large screen. Liam Donovan's face appeared sharp and clear. He was in his own boardroom, exuding an aura of calm capability. "Good morning, members of the board," Liam began. "I won't take much of your time. In light of the market volatility surrounding Caldwell Industries, Auratech is presenting a formal time-sensitive offer to acquire a 51% controlling stake in Caldwell's entire tech and R&D division. We will pay a 25% premium over Tuesday's closing price. We believe this division has been fundamentally mismanaged and its potential squandered. Our offer is a lifeline that will inject immediate capital, stabilize the stock price, and bring focused leadership to a struggling but valuable asset. The offer is contingent on the immediate removal of Alexander Caldwell from any executive or operational role within the company. It was a masterstroke, a pincer movement. Gabriella had destroyed Alexander's credibility from the inside, while Liam presented a golden parachute for the panicked board from the outside. Alexander finally exploded. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "No. This is a conspiracy, a hostile takeover orchestrated by my wife and my rival. She's been feeding him proprietary information. It's illegal." Gabriella rose slowly, her pregnant form, a symbol of quiet strength amidst his chaotic rage. "Alexander, everything I presented today was derived from public financial filings and shareholder reports. The only proprietary information I had was a front-row seat to your incompetence. Your paranoia is not a defense." She turned to the board. "Gabettleman, you have a choice. You can stick with a CEO who has publicly disgraced himself and privately been driving this company into the ground, or you can vote to save it. The choice is yours." Robert Pike looked at Alexander's furious red face, then at Gabriella's calm, determined one. He looked at the plummeting stock chart, and then at Liam Donovan's lucrative offer on the screen. It wasn't a choice at all, Alexander Pike said, his voice heavy with finality. "Perhaps it would be best if you recused yourself from the room so the board can deliberate." It was over. He knew it. Being asked to leave was the corporate equivalent of being led to the guillotine. He stared at Gabriella, his eyes filled with a new, terrifying emotion, respect twisted with pure hatred. He had been beaten, outmaneuvered, not by a rival CEO, but by the quiet, art-loving wife he had dismissed and disdained. He had walked into his boardroom a king, and he would be leaving as nothing. The board's decision was delivered with the cold, bloodless efficiency of a corporate execution. There was no room for appeal. Alexander Caldwell was suspended as CEO and chairman, effective immediately. The deliberation, in truth, had been a mere formality, a 30-minute exercise in legal phrasing, to ratify a conclusion that had become inevitable the moment Gabriella started her presentation. The walk from the boardroom to the elevator was the longest of Alexander's life. The board members' men he'd shared cigars and multi-million-dollar deals with averted their eyes, suddenly fascinated by the grain of the mahogany table or the cityscape outside. He was no longer one of them. He was a liability, a ghost haunting the halls of his own empire. The air once charged with his authority now seemed to reject him, pushing him out. As he stepped into the private elevator, his head of security, a man who had been with him for 15 years, stepped in beside him. "Your car is waiting downstairs, sir," the guard said, his voice carefully neutral. But as the doors slid shut, Alexander saw it, the flicker of pity in the man's eyes. It was more galling than any insult. He wasn't feared anymore. He was pitiful. Downstairs, the atmosphere was even colder. His key card, when he instinctively swiped it to exit the executive turnstile, flashed red. Access denied. The security guard at the main desk had to buzz him out manually, a small but profound humiliation that announced his fall to everyone in the lobby. He was a trespasser in his own building. The ride back to the Fifth Avenue penthouse was a blur of silent fury and creeping dread. He had built this city, or so he'd felt. Now its towering structures seemed to mock him, indifferent to his collapse. When he arrived, the doorman, a man named George, whose children's birthdays Alexander had always remembered to acknowledge with a generous check, simply nodded his usual effusive greeting, replaced by a somber professionalism. He handed Alexander a crisp legal envelope. "This was delivered for you by courier Mr. Caldwell." Alexander took it without a glance, his mind already churning. He stormed into the grand foyer of the penthouse, the sound of his footsteps echoing on the cold marble. The apartment was deathly quiet, but not empty. In the master suite, he found Tiffany Monroe in a state of frantic motion. 3 large Louis Vuitton suitcases were splayed open on the bed, and she was sweeping armfuls of designer clothes, shoes, and handbags into them with a desperate, frantic energy. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. She spun around her face, a mask of panic and fury streaked with mascara. "What does it look like?" She snapped, her voice high and shrill. "I'm leaving. The news is already everywhere. Lex, it's on every blog, every news site. You've been fired. Fired! Do you have any idea what that does to me?" To you, he scoffed the absurdity of the statement, cutting through his rage. "Yes, to me," she shrieked, throwing a pair of Christian Louboutin heels into a case. "My agent just called. The skincare campaign I was the face of. They dropped me. The reality show I was in, talks for. They're going in a different direction. They said my brand is now toxic, associated with a messy public scandal. I'm a pariah, Lex. Because of you and your psycho, scheming wife." "Don't call her that." He said the word surprising even himself. "She's not crazy, Tiffany. She's brilliant. A goddamn Machiavelli in a maternity dress." He collapsed onto the edge of the bed, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a vast, hollow exhaustion. He looked around the room at the priceless art on the walls, the silk sheets on the bed. It all felt like a movie set for a life he no longer lived. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Back to LA, I guess. I'll have to beg my agent to get me a spot on some C-list celebrity island show." She zipped a suitcase with a vicious tug, then turned to him, her expression hardening from panic to cold calculation. "You're going to give me money, right? For my trouble. A severance package. For everything I've had to endure." He stared at her, a bitter laugh catching in his throat. He finally saw her for what she was, a beautiful, rapacious creature whose affection had been entirely transactional. "My assets are frozen, Tiffany. The corporate accounts, the joint marital accounts, everything. Your lawyer already knows. He called mine an hour ago." Her perfectly sculpted face contorted with disbelief, then rage. "Then unfreeze them. You're Alexander Caldwell. You're a billionaire. Do something. I'm a billionaire on paper," he yelled back, standing up again, the sheer helplessness of his situation making him tremble. "Don't you understand? All my liquidity, my power, my entire identity, it was all tied to the company. I'm a king with no country. I have nothing to give you." The argument that followed was raw and pathetic. Her demands devolved into shrieks about the time she had wasted on him, while his admissions of powerlessness became broken whimpers. It ended when she spat a final venomous insult, grabbed her suitcases, and stormed out of the apartment, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and shattered promises in her wake. The heavy front door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the vast, empty rooms. He was truly alone. He sank into an armchair, the silence of the penthouse pressing in on him. His eyes fell on the legal envelope the doorman had given him. With numb fingers, he tore it open. It was a formal notice to vacate the premises within 30 days, issued by the trustees of the Langdon family estate. The penthouse, he was reminded, in cold, unforgiving legalese, was not marital property. It belonged to Gabriella's family trust. It had never truly been his. 2 days later, Tiffany's tell-all interview was published. It painted him as a manipulative, washed-up fool. It was the final ignominious shovelful of dirt on the grave of his public reputation. While Alexander's world was contracting into a prison of silence and shame, Gabriella's was expanding into one of purpose and light. She had moved out of the gilded cage on Fifth Avenue and into a beautiful sunlit brownstone in the West Village she had purchased through her trust. The house was filled with books and warm, comfortable furniture. It felt like a home, not a showroom. She worked with a quiet, ferocious intensity. She was on daily calls with the interim CEO and the board, her insights into the company's structural weaknesses proving invaluable. She worked alongside Liam's integration team, ensuring the acquisition of the tech division was smooth and strategic. In meetings, she was no longer an observer, but a participant, her voice calm and authoritative, her questions sharp and incisive. The board members who had once seen her as little more than a society wife now looked at her with a newfound, profound respect. She wasn't just the savior of her father's legacy. She was its future. Her days were a balance of corporate strategy and personal creation. She spent hours in what would be the nursery, a peaceful room overlooking a small garden. She assembled a simple wooden crib with her own hands, the scent of fresh pine filling the air. She painted the walls a soft, calming shade of sage green. Each task was a deliberate act of building a new world, a safe, stable, and loving environment for her child, a world free from the chaos and ego of his father. This was why she had gone to war. Not for revenge, but for this. For peace. One afternoon, Liam stopped by, bringing coffee and pastries. "Just checking in," he said, his smile genuine, "to make sure the new vice chair isn't overdoing it." The board had made its offer the day before. Impressed by her acumen and recognizing the powerful narrative of a Langdon reclaiming her family's company, they had asked her to take a permanent seat on the board and the title of vice chair. I feel more energized than I have in years, she confessed, placing a hand on her stomach. He's been kicking all morning. I think he approves of the new business plan. Liam looked at her, his expression full of a deep, uncomplicated admiration. Your father would be so proud of you, Gabe. You didn't just save his company. You honored his intelligence by showing them your own. It was the validation she needed. This victory was hers, earned through her own courage and intellect. A week later, Alexander requested a meeting. He chose the venue, a small, anonymous cafe downtown. When he walked in, she was struck by his transformation. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitant, stooped posture. His expensive suit hung on his frame, and the dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. He looked like a man hollowed out from the inside. Gabriella, he began, his voice raspy and uncertain. He could barely meet her eyes. I don't even know what to say. Then don't say anything, Alexander, she replied, her tone not unkind, but firm. Our lawyers are finalizing the settlement. It's quite generous, all things considered. It's not about the money, he said, and this time she believed him. It's about everything. About our child. I made a mistake. A catastrophic, unforgivable mistake. I see that now. But whatever I am still going to be a father. It was the one truth that could not be litigated away. She looked at him, the father of her child, and felt a wave of weary finality. The anger was gone, burned away, leaving behind only the stark reality of their new relationship. Yes, you are, she said, her voice softening. And this child will deserve a father, but not the man you were. Not the arrogant, dismissive tyrant who thought I was nothing more than a beautiful, stupid decoration. She met his gaze directly, her own clear and steady. I did all of this to protect our child from that man, to secure a future free from your chaos and your ego. She leaned forward slightly. You will have a role in our child's life, Alexander. You can earn the right to be called Dad, but you will have to work for it. You will start from nothing, just like you forced so many others to do. You will prove through your actions that you can be a responsible, humble, and present man. That is your only path back. Not to me and not to the company, but to him. He nodded slowly, the fight completely gone, replaced by a flicker of something she hadn't seen in him for a very long time. Humility. And the company? He asked, a final ghost of a question. The company is in good hands, she said, a quiet, unshakable confidence in her voice. My hands? She left him there, a solitary figure in a cheap cafe, a fallen titan contemplating the ruins of a life he had single-handedly destroyed. As Gabriella stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, she felt her baby kick a strong, reassuring pulse against her hand. She had not just survived. She had not just won. She had dismantled an empire built on arrogance, and from its ashes architected a future built on strength. What a story of poetic justice. It's a powerful reminder that the people we underestimate are often the ones with the most strength hiding in plain sight. Alexander built his world on arrogance and disrespect, believing his wife was just another one of his possessions. But Gabriella proved that she was not a chapter in his story. She was the story. She didn't just get mad, she got strategic, and in the end, she took everything. It makes you wonder how many other silent partners and underestimated people out there are just one betrayal away from unleashing their own inner genius. What do you think was Gabriella's takedown, a brilliant act of empowerment, or a cold, calculated revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories where the underdog comes out on top with a masterful plan, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and subscribe for more incredible true life dramas.